Our next conversation today is with Colorado State Representative Mike Lynch of Wellington, one of 6 candidates for Colorado's 4th Congressional District, the first in a series of interviews that we're holding with those candidates. Representative Mike Lynch, thank you for your time.
You bet. Glad to be here.
Before we get to the congressional race, right now there are growing calls for Colorado Republican Chairman Dave Williams to resign over anti-gay hate. Among other things, he called for the burning of all pride flags. And also, he's been using party resources to boost his own campaign for Congress in a contested Republican primary. Do you think Chairman Williams should go?
Absolutely.
What bothers you most about his conduct?
Nothing that he does fits the mission of getting Republicans elected. So his latest fiasco, which I honestly have not even looked at that email, but he had me at endorsing candidates in the primary and misusing funds.
You're not just sore that he wanted you out when you were in a state house position and that he endorsed Lauren Boebert for this race? That's not what it's about?
Not at all, no. Mm-mm.
When you heard, perhaps you didn't if you didn't see the email, so I'll tell you, when the state chair of the GOP echoed the hateful slur used by Westboro Baptist Church when they picket servicemen's funerals, you served, and called for the burning of all pride flags, what do you think when you hear something like that?
That is what I've worked to try to avoid. That sort of vitriol does not do anything for citizens, right? And it's sad that that's part of our public discourse nowadays. So I just, kind of rolled my eyes and said, what's next? So.
Where do you place yourself on the ideological spectrum? You strike me as kind of like a traditional conservative, but now everything these days in the GOP is viewed through the lens of how loyal are you to Donald Trump? Yeah. You've said that you will support him, even though he's a convicted felon, but I get the sense that you're uncomfortable with some of the things that not only Trump says, but some of his policies, like mass deportation. Where do you put yourself on the spectrum?
I've always thought I was as conservative as you could get. I put myself on the spectrum of get stuff done. There's not time for the tweets and all of the crazy stuff that has unfortunately become a part of this, and I just have not participated in that. If I'm going to spend my time not making money in my business, I'm going to spend time getting stuff done. So what does that look like? Well, that looks like I have to talk to the other side. That looks like I have to actually come to the table with people that ideologically I don't agree with and find that common bond. And there is one. In any relationship, there is a common bond at some point, and then you build and solve problems from there.
Are Republican primary voters interested in somebody who is looking for consensus and compromise as you are to get things passed? Is that what they want this year?
I would hope so. I mean, there are so many issues facing our citizens right now. The cost of living is ridiculous. Gas is, it varies wildly. I can tell you that you can save $1 by buying gas here versus out on the Eastern Plains. I literally have seen the gas price vary. It's $1 more out of here. So I really believe property tax, people are really hurting financially. And I think that's what we need to be focusing on.
So when you led in the State House, when you served in the State House, you were in the minority. You had to get Democrats to come along. You had to get the governor to sign on to your ideas. How would that impact your approach in Congress, where you may or may not be in a House Republican majority?
Yeah, well, it would be really cool to be in a majority. I've never been in one, but that switches that role. When you're in the minority, you can say, well, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. But for once to be in a position to actually be able to implement some of these ideas. So I really look forward to that, assuming we keep it, right? So,
what more could Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert have done with her office in the last 4 years that you believe she has not and should have done?
Yeah, boy, I tell you, voting against bringing money back to the district is I think, not a good policy, right? I believe that the congressman's job is that you spend your money on federal tax dollars. It's my job to go out there and get them back.
So you're okay with earmarks? Some
Absolutely.
People say that's pork projects, but you're comfortable with it.
Well, when I drive around the Eastern Plains, a place that needs any help it can get, most certainly. Yeah.
What else other than earmarks, whereas we've covered, Congresswoman Boebert will ask for the money for the project, she'll earmark it, but then she'll vote against the larger bill so that she can also say that she's against a lot of government spending. Other than earmarks, where do you take issue with her record?
I just want to say up front that the people's personal life should not be part of this. But really, I don't think folks are able to actually communicate with her office. I think
meaning constituents.
Constituents, right? Yeah. I know that was an issue with the 4th CD. Even when I was the minority leader, I had a hard time getting the attention of Ken Buck when funding was coming from the federal level to our state. So I believe there's been a disconnect there. That's what I've heard. She's not been my congressman, so I haven't needed to talk with her. I do know that some of that money, when it was coming to the state, I needed her attention because it was affecting her district, and I wasn't able to get any information out of her about millions of dollars that were coming to the state of Colorado.
So she's clearly the front runner in this race. She's got tons of name ID, tons of money, and there's 5 other candidates in the race.
Yeah.
Okay? If this was a one-on-one race between you and Congresswoman Boebert or one of the other candidates and Congresswoman Boebert, it would be a whole different dynamic.
Absolutely.
How did it get to the point that there are 5 candidates in this race and nearly all of you are quite critical of her, not as critical of one another, but yet you couldn't all sit down and figure out who's going to run this race?
Yeah, here's the good news. It's half as big as it was. So we've gone from 11 to 6. And then things just evolved there. I mean, that is part of what's wrong with the Republican Party of Colorado right now, is the ability to sit down and work something out behind closed doors. That is kind of gone from the Republican Party right now. And so that, I believe that translated into this race as well, where, and this is unfortunately an ego game, right? Nobody wants to say, oh, I'm going to get out, I'm going to get out. And it seems like it came on kind of fast, right? With that the narrowing of that field happened fast, and then the ballots were printed, close. I think if we had more time, I think we would actually be able to do that. But
When you say ego, you talking about yourself too?
At some point, if you're in politics, you have to have an ego at some level, right? The reason I wouldn't get out of the race is the same reason I ever got into politics, which is I didn't see anybody that was better than me in the running. That's how I first got into this.
I think there's a lot of you that share that view of yourselves, and that's the reason why it's a 6-person race. But
Exactly.
I want to talk to you about a leadership issue, and we've talked about this before. So you resigned your position as Republican House Minority Leader after colleagues got upset that you had failed to disclose a drunk driving arrest to them. You still decided to run for Congress even after all of that. So here's my question. If the Republicans who worked most closely with you lost faith in your ability to lead them, why should voters hire you?
Yeah. So technically, I won the vote of no confidence. I stepped down voluntarily. So now, granted, under pressure from the parts of the party that I don't particularly agree with, right? They saw an opportunity and they took it. None of us are perfect. You go through life and you learn lessons. That was a huge one. I don't know that there's some guidebook of, hey, I legitimately made the biggest screw up I've ever done in my life. I've got a pretty pristine record outside of that. Well, not pretty. I got a very pristine record, through going to West Point, I've always kind of won. There's no guidebook on how you go about getting that out there. In retrospect, I would do it differently, for sure.
You tell your colleagues when they were voting you minority leader, you'd put that at least in the room so that they knew?
Absolutely, yeah.
Would you have gone public and told the public about it?
I would have probably told the public first.
Yeah. I remember you saying you wanted to protect your kids.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, you would have told the public, you think?
Yeah, I think so. But the kid thing was a big part of that as well, right? And that opinion came after I saw how much that was out there. I didn't know that till I went through that experience, right? And then, so in retrospect, I went, whew, glad I didn't do that while my kids were having to go to school every day. So that take was kind of a looking back.
More retrospective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about some policy issues.
Yeah.
You've been skeptical of Donald Trump's plan to deport as many as 17 million people who he says are in the country illegally. Conservative estimate is that's at least 150,000 people who would be rounded up in Colorado and deported. Yeah. Trump's talking about using local police to do this, National Guard, possibly even the military. Would you vote against mass deportation in Congress on a funding issue, or do you just think it's unwise? It's clear you're uncomfortable with the concept.
Yeah, because the government can't do anything right? And when you, it would look like a police state. Like I would really have to see the nuts and bolts of how that plan is going to be executed. The way it's thrown out there right now is just all this rhetoric about just go to the Greyhound and grab all the buses and start batons, and I think we need to do whatever we can to assimilate those folks that can add to our society. And so that's a whole nother conversation. How do we revamp immigration laws? And then the ones that are here illegally, how do we, in an orderly fashion, return them where they came from?
Do you believe that every person who is in this country without legal right should go? Everyone?
You know, if we're going to be a nation of laws, and that is a law that we are going to have on the books, you know, there's only one answer, which is yes, that they are here illegally. But the problem is they are now here, right? And so now how do we deal with, change the law? I mean, that's what legislators do.
Are you comfortable with the idea of creating a path to legal status or a path to citizenship for people who entered the country illegally?
Absolutely, yeah.
For who in that population? Give me some idea.
Well,
we're not writing legislation here, but what does your gut tell you?
Well, so that causes us to do a couple things. One is identify who they are. So now we're capturing the data on these folks, and then making an assessment whether they will truly add or detract, you know, get on our welfare programs, or whether they will become the next Bill Gates and design some new computer. So. Yeah, so we've got to come up with a way of knowing who these folks are, and then we figure out what we do with them better.
So when we talk about the 4th Congressional District, we know there's no reason to believe it's any different than Colorado, which is that the vast majority of people who are in the 4th District without legal documentation are working, and that about half of them have been here for a very long time, like 15, 20, 25 years, people who are deeply rooted in the community. Yeah. Is it realistic to talk about deporting those folks?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a broken system that has allowed these folks to be here and function and contribute to our society at some level, right? So to just massively say, I mean, it's almost like put a timeline on it. Like, how long have you been here? You know, if you've been here 5 minutes, then you know what, things are a little different. Turn around. So you know. But that is what legislating is about, is digging into that issue and figuring out what makes sense. But just walking around and just gathering people up, we are going to, and this is what I said during the debate, we are going to accidentally, I think, grab some people that we want here and get them out of our country.
You brought up the cost of living and inflation. What is feasible for Congress to do to tackle those issues? I mean, you're talking about the price of gas as well. Like, American energy is cranking right now, and gas prices still go up and down as they do, seasonal fluctuations, world market pressures, things like that. What can the U.S. Congress do?
Well, you know, focusing on CD4 and Weld County, which I've represented for the last 4 years, you know, there's regulations and there are policies that are slowing that economy down. They're more from the state than they are the federal government right now. But whatever we can do to protect that industry, we've got the cleanest production of anywhere in the world. The world needs that resource. We make more money when we export. Whatever we can do to prop up the energy sector in Colorado, we need to do. And so I believe there's a little bit of a federal role there. As far as the constraints on it, we see that happen a lot at the state level. And I believe from the position of Congress, I could be part of that conversation. That's one thing we haven't seen from our Congress people lately is, you know, at the Capitol, I've seen one the entire time I'm there. And so I'm kind of, there's a lack of communication between what can happen between the federal and state level, I believe.
One big question is if and when Republicans will break with Donald Trump, and on what, right? There was a bipartisan immigration deal that got sunk, it appears in part because Trump said he didn't want it. He wanted it as an election issue. Yeah. Standing up to Trump is a great way to get bounced from today's Republican Party. Mm-hmm. Are there issues where you feel comfortable standing up to him? I'm sure we'll run into them. For the most part, his policies have not been a problem for me. The way he goes about his business and has in the past is where I have the real problem. A lot of his policies, I can tell you for sure, I was more prosperous 4 years ago. So it's more of the way he conducts business than the business that he conducts. But you haven't seen anything that would cause him to lose your vote in November?
No, but keep in mind, there's two options here, right? And I really don't like the other option, so that weighs into that as well. I'm not excited that he endorsed my opponent, right? But I'm not going to hold that against him when it comes time to vote.
Where is there a significant policy difference between you and other folks in this field? When I read what you say on the stump and I see what other folks say, I don't see a whole lot of daylight on policy issues. I see some stylistic things, some experiential differences. Do you see a big policy change?
I don't. I see a big difference in policy experience. My fight for fentanyl in this state has been become a real passion of mine because it's the #1 killer of our military-age men and women in this state and in the nation. So I've got certain areas that I've championed, and I would say that distinguishes me from the other folks that I can't tell you for sure where they're going to go with stuff. I can tell you for sure. As I literally just this weekend was speaking at an opioid conference, but I can tell you where I'm going to go with possibilities of making positive impact in Colorado, and that would be to do whatever we can to fix this fentanyl problem we've got.
Coloradans send you to Congress. They look back in 2, 4, 6 years. They will be able to say, Mike Lynch was this, Mike Lynch did that. What's your pitch? One
of the areas I'm really passionate about is getting on the Armed Services Committee and making sure that we have our troops ready. I served under a Democrat administration, and that's why I got out of the military, because there was no funding for it. They had used it as kind of an experimental ground. This was in the early 90s. Number one, that he helped maintain our readiness through the military, and also stood up for oil and gas and got us going, or made sure that the government wasn't getting in the way of us moving with oil and gas industry.
Last question for you. Some people have said that Congresswoman Lauren Boebert has embarrassed Colorado through her behavior. I'm curious whether you think she has, in fact, embarrassed Colorado. And given that you've gone through your own personal embarrassment within the last year, what can you tell voters about whether you in Congress would embarrass them?
Yeah. The only thing I can reflect on is for folks to go look at how I legislated the last 4 years. Minus one blip, I feel like I was the guy that wasn't afraid to, at one point I voted for the speaker, to be the speaker because she was going to be the speaker. And I was the guy that crossed the aisle and got a lot of stuff done. And because of that also, the majority invited me on some great bills. We've got a ballot measure that's coming up that removes bond from capital crimes. That's my bill. I would not have been invited to those sort of high level bills if I couldn't work across the aisle and get something done.
Do you think the Congresswoman has embarrassed Colorado?
Boy, I started this off by saying I didn't want to talk about personal stuff with, I would say more from her lack of getting stuff done than her personal actions, yes. Personal life is personal life, and I don't want to attack her on that. But the fact she's done nothing for my state, that offends me a lot more.
State Representative Mike Lynch, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming in.